Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us on this short notice ROM hang. My name is Ryan Dodge. I'm the social media coordinator here at the Royal Ontario Museum, and I'm very excited today because we are here to talk about one of our finest collections of paintings in the museum, if I can say that. I'm here with Ken Lister, who's an assistant curator in our ethnology department of World Cultures, and Heidi Sobel, the senior conservator of paintings at the museum. We're actually in Heidi's office, which is the Paintings Conservation Lab here on the 5th floor at the museum. And we're talking about this painting in particular and some work that Ken's done over the last few years with looking at Paul Kane's sketches and trying to look for his locations where he sketched all these wonderful works of art. So Ken, maybe you can bring us up to speed with the work you've been doing in the last few years?
Sure, Ryan, thank you very much. This is, we're looking at the Paul Kane collection. First, Paul Kane was a Canadian artist. He was born in 1810 in Ireland and came over to Canada around 1819. He died in 1871. The reason why Paul Kane is so important in Canadian art, because in 1845 to 1848 he went on two journeys, right from Toronto across to the Pacific Ocean, recording Native people and the Canadian landscape. And the reason he was doing that, because at the time it was thought the Native people were going to disappear. And he wanted to record Canada's Native people in the same way that George Catlin did it for the Americans. Now, he came back to Toronto with 600 sketches. He then spent between 1849 and 1856 working up his sketches into more formal romantic oil paintings, such as we see on the canvas here. That's the kind of painting that Kane did, and the ROM fortunately has a full cycle of 100 canvases that Kane did to make that record of his particular journey. So that's the reason why Paul Kane is important, and why the ROM collection is important, because we have the 100 canvases, plus we also have 373 of his original field sketches.
Wow.
So what I'm particularly interested in is, if we're looking at a Paul Kane sketch, and we're looking at a Paul Kane oil painting, can we assume that what we're looking at is what he actually saw? And the way in which to determine that is to go and find the sketch sites, compare the site to the sketch, and then compare the sketch to the oil painting. So in 2006, I started that process, primarily here in Ontario, working, but also in Venice, Italy, but here in Ontario.
Nice.
And so what I did is I traveled up through Georgian Bay, up into northern and northwestern Ontario, specifically looking for the sites, photograph the sites, and then compare the sites to the sketches. One of the paintings that I was particularly interested in is this one. This is called French River Rapids. Now, part of the complication here is in 1904, many, many years after Paul Kane had passed away, this painting was identified as being on the French River, just up north of us. It's the river, it's an important fur trade river that joins Lake Nipissing to Georgian Bay.
Right.
However, Kane was never known to have traveled on that particular river. So the question then is, if this isn't that location, where is it? So I started looking at Kane's journals, his sketch, historical maps, the way in which he talked about the site, and also in his book he talks about the French portage. Now the French portage, the one that we know of that's quite famous, is on the eastern boundary of Quetico Provincial Park. So I started to think, and I also used Google Maps, I started to think, well, maybe this location could be there. So that's what I did. I went there. I was traveling by car and on the waterways by kayak. And using the sketch, now this particular sketch for this painting is at the Stark Museum of Art in Orange, Texas. But I had a copy of it. And so I just traveled and walked up the river until I found this location. And what I was looking for is that particular rock there. You can see, I thought that maybe we might be able to still see it. Plus, we would definitely be able to see the big cliff that you see in the background. Now, the site where I was looking at was completely overgrown with brush. But nevertheless, as I walked up, the first thing I saw was that rock. It looks almost identical today. But however, the bluff in the background was totally hidden by trees. But as I walked up closer, and then you started pushing the trees away, lo and behold, there it was. So that's when I knew that we had actually found this particular location. So it's about 830 kilometers west of where it actually is.
Wow. So, I mean, you're standing there in the middle of the forest up north. You find this spot. What happens next? What do you freak out? Do you start get out a notepad and start writing down coordinates, or
no? I had a glass of wine. That's what I had.
That's fantastic.
But it is exciting. I mean, this is just one of the locations that I find. But it is amazing to sort of sit there, stand on literally, or sit on the rock that Kane sat on to take this particular sketch.
Yeah.
But more important than that is, you can't see it in the sketch, but right about the time that Kane died in 1871, the Canadian government built a dam right at that location. And because they built the dam, the reason they did that was to create the Dawson Road, which was the way in which the Canadian government was trying to get settlers to go from Lake Superior to the Red River settlement.
Right.
So they put the dam in, raised the water so that they could get tugs through to get people and horses and oxen out to the Red River. What that meant, though, is they had to change that landing because the dam was right up here. So the landing after 1871 was pushed slightly further upstream. This landing that Paul Kane recorded, which was the original eastern end of the French portage, was abandoned and lost to memory. We didn't even know it existed. So it was actually through finding this site by using Paul Kane's painting, they were actually really able to find the original landing of the French portage. But then it gets more exciting because then we realize that this was actually an undisturbed archaeological site because it had been abandoned since 1871.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because that's pretty awesome. But I want to get Heidi in here because another aspect of this project is also conserving these wonderful works of art and sort of the record, if you will. And I mean, I know you guys have done other work with infrared and things like that with these paintings. Well, maybe that's another hangout to talk about what you found there. But I want to maybe, Heidi, could you talk about sort of the work you've done on these paintings and I think it's important, but maybe could you emphasize that for the audience?
Sure. When I first started here at the ROM about 6 years ago, there were a number of curators very interested in having paintings conserved or working with them because we hadn't had one. The ROM hadn't had one for quite some time. And actually it was one of Ken's presentations, and I think it was for a ROM colloquium in which you were presenting this information as it was developed. It was the summer after you got back. And that was what first really triggered my interest in our Paul Kane collection. I knew it was vast and had a lot of great examples of his work, and it was the largest collection in Canada. But it was when Ken was talking about all the work he was doing, I was like, I'm really going to get into these paintings and see what they're all about. Mm-hmm. It was the first acquisition of the ROM. The acquisition number designates it as number 1. So that's very interesting. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, but what that means to me as well is that the paintings were in our collection for a very long time. They were not out in auction houses and in basements and attics having other restorers tinker with them. A lot of the restoration that I do, or conservation, is fixing previous restoration attempts. So I was very grateful to have a collection that was finite, that it was a 100 painting suite, and that I could look at it and evaluate it. The health of the collection is pretty good. I'd say only about 25 to 40% were restored before. So there's a lot of what we call virginal paintings that almost the last person to have touched it was Paul Kane.
Wow.
And you can't ask for any more than that, especially when you're doing diagnostic work or evaluative work on his palette or his pigment examples. That came into play when we did our IR study for the past 2 years. But most interestingly, about 25% were heavily restored. Were they restored in the interim while they were here at the ROM, or were they restored when they were in the possession of, I guess, GWL and so on and so forth? Very difficult to say. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, a lot of the treatments that I do on Paul Kane paintings has to do with some of these ameliorative fixes of what the older restorations have done. They were a little bit dramatic. Conservation nowadays is a lot less interventionist. We're not
a little less invasive.
A little less invasive, yeah. But it's about stabilization and preservation.
Right.
There's hopefully we've gone away from arrogance, in the past 40, 50 years ago, where everything was treated very dramatically.
Okay. So I guess I'm interested because this painting is going out in the gallery this weekend, right? And people will be able to come and see this painting. Are there others with the rotation, or is it just this one that's going out this weekend?
No, the rotation consists of two sections. This one, where we're talking about the French River Rapids, also another painting called Fishing by Torchlight.
Oh, right, okay.
They're two separate little displays, but the Fishing by Torchlight shows Menominee Indians from Wisconsin on the Fox River fishing with a jacklight. And what's one of the reasons we're putting that painting out is just very recently, within the last 2 years, we acquired a jacklight. So people will be able to see the painting along with a sketch, that the original sketch, the 1845 sketch that Paul Kane took, we also just acquired.
Oh, wow.
It was in the private world. We were able to purchase it, and so now people are going to be able to see the original painting. More importantly, the original sketch, which is now part of the Ron collection, and the jacklight. So be able to, it's the whole story if you put on the wall.
Nice. So well, I guess what I was getting at is rotations. Paint, like how often do paintings get rotated in and out of the collection? Does it depend on the state that they're in when they're put on display? Maybe can you shed some light on how that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how we put together exhibitions originates with the curator, the vast majority of the time. Mm-hmm. But what we like to do is very collaborative development of the exhibition. If you have a really healthy collection of paintings, you don't have to do a lot of conservation treats. Your lead time is shortened. So you give the curator a lot of opportunity to build the exhibition as they see fit, with not too much conservation. But what we like to do, or I like to do, is working with the curator to see if there's any investigative or diagnostic things I can do in conservation, which lends itself to interpreting what they're trying to get across.
Right.
And so that works really well.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the great examples is what we're talking about is we just acquired the sketch. And when you look at that sketch, it's so very different, isn't it, in technique, mm-hmm. than this is. This is where Heidi can be of great assistance too, because we're looking at what the oil's on it, the chemical makeup of the oil, paint on paper. Mm-hmm. This, interesting enough, is also Verlon's first oil on paper sketch. But through conservation, of course, I'm interested in the content.
Right.
Heidi's interested in the content as well as the technique, and this is where this kind of partnership comes in and works really well.
Really a sort of like a super detective team from different aspects of expertise,
We
right?
usually wear capes.
Yeah. We don't have any capes on right now, but maybe in a future hangout we'll get to those capes. So I'm just checking the time here. We're about halfway through this hangout. I wanted to pause for a second, remind everyone that you can watch the hangout on our YouTube channel on the Paul Kane rotation exhibit page right now, or if you're on Google+, on Google+. If you have any questions for Heidi or Ken, you can do that through Twitter. I've got my phone right here ready to go. The hashtag's ROMHang. Feel free to ask us questions if you have any for Heidi and Ken. I want to get back to we were talking about standing in this exact spot, and really the spot had been untouched since the government built the dam. And maybe can you talk about just digging in that site and bringing those pieces to light after so many years? Right.
Well, excuse me. Standing there, completely covered in brush, is actually a good thing, because it is, as you were talking, it seemed to be an undisturbed archaeological site. So I went to Quetico Provincial Park. This location actually is on the very northeastern section within Quetico Provincial Park, which is nice because it's protected.
Right.
So Quetico Provincial Park, the Royal Ontario Museum, and a company here in town called Archaeological Services Incorporated went up in October 2008 to test excavate the site. And what we found was as astonishing as finding the bluff, because what came up was a pipe stem, a kaolin pipe stem, a piece of china, and also a metal hook. And your viewers may not be able to see this, but right at this part of the painting, there's a tripod And the voyageurs are cooking with this tripod over fire, and the pot is being hung from the tripod with a wire. So we excavated a wire. Now, unfortunately, we can't say it's that wire, but it is a wire. This site was, or this area of the portage was used for at least 50 years. So that told us that we had the right site. First of all, it corresponded well with what Paul Kane was showing in the painting. The next year, again with the help of Quetico Provincial Park, we went up and we did a full-scale excavation. And we came up with quite a number of artifacts, lithics or stone tools, which shows that the site was used prior to European contact. We also found more metal, possibly the end of another hook, possibly the handle for a pot. We found pipe stems, metal nails dating prior to 1840. So what this showed is we did indeed have a historic landing, and it's what I like to say, it's a wonderful marriage of art history and archaeology, where you can find the site using a painting such as this. Fortunately undisturbed, you can go back and excavate, and what we find is exactly what we would expect to find by looking at this painting.
That's the thing about the Paul Kane paintings, is their ethnographic depth. Like their purpose is so obvious in what they exhibit, but in terms of the Rom's mandate, it goes hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and also what I found, the reason that I started the study was asking the question, when we're looking at a Paul Kane sketch, can we assume that what we're looking at is what he saw? And my answer to that is yes. You can stand at the location that Paul Kane stood at and sketched, photograph that location, and as long as that location hasn't been changed due to European influences, then what you're looking at in the photograph is also what Kane sketched. Now, and also actually with the sketch on this particular painting is very close to what Kane painted on the oil painting.
Right.
Sometimes he romanticizes oil paintings, so there's some changes. That's why the sketches are more significant ethnographically. This is significantly ethnographically, as well as how it fits into the role of Canadian history.
So basically, we're looking at a pit stop on the very first Trans-Canada Highway, pretty much.
Pretty much,
right? Folks, right there at home, if you're watching at home, there you go.
And if you're traveling on the Trans-Canada Highway now, you drive, interestingly enough, you drive by that location, you can almost see it.
People have been going past it for years and not even know it was there. I think it's amazing, and this is part of why I love working at museums. It's because we have so many experts in so many different areas that look at objects from a different perspective maybe, and can show that not only is it a tangible link to the past, that it's also a link to archaeology, and you can go and find those sites and pull that stuff out of the ground and put that piece into context. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and what it does is it brings that particular part of the Canadian landscape back into Canadian history, because it's essentially lost, or at least to our cultural memory. So by looking at older paintings such as this and finding these sites, it doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally you'll get it, so that it now becomes part of our cultural heritage.
Right. Okay. So let's see. We've got a few minutes left. I guess this painting will go on display this week. There's both the Fishing by Torchlight display and French River Rapids display will be on view on Saturday. So come out on Saturday and check it out. How long are they scheduled to be on display?
This display will be up until March.
Up until March, okay.
And you could also mention that with the painting, there's going to be all of the artifacts that we excavated. So it really is, we're trying to give a sort of contextual view of what we can find out of this painting. And of course, the artifacts belong to Quetico Provincial Park, so here's the opportunity to see them, because after the exhibition, they'll be going back to
the park. Okay.
And then separated from the painting from which they were, triggered.
Is there an opportunity to maybe loan this painting to the provincial park? I don't know. I've never been up there. So is there,
it's certainly possible. We have very rigorous loan program. And we're interested, of course, in loaning not only the Kane material, but all of our material at the ROM, given the appropriate conservation conditions, which Heidi would adjudicate and determine where the appropriate places are. But certainly, we're open for discussions.
Right. Awesome. Heidi, was there anything else you want to talk about this particular piece? Was there any sort of, out of the ordinary treatments or anything?
Not recently. I did do a little bit of work on this painting and a number of others, but this is what I like to call an A-level cane. So one of those paintings that didn't suffer under the wrath of a previous restorer, well-intentioned as they were. That's what I love to see about these nice, healthy paintings, and I don't like to inflict myself onto these if it's not necessary. Right. So this is one that is in stellar condition. We're not seeing any disturbance in the paint strata. And for the most part, I would say, of the 100 paintings, they are all very stable paintings, with exception. But the thing I'm finding out about Kane, and it's reinforced through my work, is that he was a really good technologist. He knew what he was doing, and by this point in his career, he had really hit his stride. He had a very comprehensive understanding of how to put a painting together. And that's reflected in the fact that we have 100 really stellar paintings. That can't be said for mid-19th century artists. What's really interesting about mid-19th century, we're switching from the studio, right, where you're making your own pigments and so on and so forth, where you have assistants and apprentices to help you, into purchasing your paints and tubes and bladders and are using artist colourmen and sending away for your paints from England or from New York. That allows you to studio, and when you do studio, you can work on plein air. And that's where you would go a whole impressionism.
Right.
Because when they left the studio, it's because now they were portable.
Wow.
And so we're starting to see that transition. And if you have a good comprehension of how to paint a painting, you will carry that through. Not every artist is that time.
Learn something every day at the museum, I gotta say, folks. It's just, again, just an amazing, piece of work that these two have done, and I'm glad we can share it sort of in this way. I think that's it for us today. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. You can leave comments on the ROM's website. You can tweet at Heidi. Heidi's handle is @Heidorama, one of the best Twitter handles we have going at the museum here. Also, follow us at ROM Toronto, and the hashtag for the Google Hangouts is ROMHang. Thanks very much, and thank you guys for taking part.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for your interest. Appreciate it.